Important update about YouTube playlists. Hey everyone. We've received many messages asking why our YouTube playlists aren't showing up. Do we create YouTube playlists? Yes, we absolutely do. So why can't you see them? Honestly, we're not sure. We've been in contact with YouTube support for several months now, but we still haven't received a clear answer or solution. After much discussion, our team has decided to take matters into our own hands. We believe the issue might be related to the number of playlists we've created on a single channel, possibly too many. Our solution? We're launching 2 additional YouTube channels, giving us a total of 3. This way, we can organize our audiobooks better and avoid the playlist visibility issue in the future. This change only affects our YouTube audience. If you're a patron supporter, you can still access all our audiobooks by visiting the collection menu on Patreon. Thanks so much for your time and continued support. Happy listening. They were just a bunch of dead bones. They were all ruined people, which was equivalent to garbage in his book. Although in terms of quality, compared to Mizuru's lineup, which was mostly Jillian, it was far better. But it was still not enough to defeat him. Although the quality of Mizuru's dead soldiers was not high, but the quantity was a lot. After his initial 100 years of venture in Hueco Mundo, the number of Minno's grands who died in Mizuru's hands could be said to be a massive number. After many years of fighting, even he didn't know how many Minno's grand had been slaughtered by him, and there was one more crucial point. The souls he summoned there were not only those who died under his hands, even those who died in the hands of Beelzebub were also intercepted by him. This was why the souls of Rankar who died in the decisive battle in Karakura town, such as Baragan, Zama-uri, and Yami, also appeared there. Although the members of Soul Society and Hueco Mundo were shocked, they didn't try to gouge out the reason. Immediately afterwards, they saw the skeleton summoned by Yamamoto and the soul of the dead summoned by Mizuru advancing at each other at the same time and started fighting. What unfolded before their eyes was an extremely tragic battle scene. Whether it was those scorched skeletons or the dead souls summoned by Mizuru, they all seemed to blindly follow the respective wills of Yamamoto and Mizuru, to kill the enemies in front of them, and never to take even a half step back. Even though their bodies were obliterated and their souls scattered, they were still moving forward and never retreated. A similar technique of summoning the dead to fight, it allowed him to counter the dead summoned by Kakaju Manakushi Daisojin. Yamamoto watched this scene, and immediately made another move. He pulled out his Zanpakuto that was stabbed into the ground, and flashed, not slower than Flash Goddess Yoruichi's flash steps. Using flash steps, in an instant, he came beside Mizuru. Another slash came out, and it was the Zanken no Tiki, Higashi, Kyoku Jitsujin. The blade slashed out without bursting flames. Before it touched Mizuru's body, Mizuru did not even feel the burning of the flames. Yamamoto tried to use this move to break the enchantment before, and the aftermath of the attack from a very long distance once made the inner wall of the barrier burst into flames. Now, he would feel the blow at the close distance. Mizuru only had the feeling that no matter where he hid, he would die in the flames for sure once it makes contact. Swish, the Kyoku Jitsujin sliced through, and Mizuru's body was reduced to ashes in the flames. Even after knowing that Mizuru's Bankai had the ability to grant him immortality, after seeing his body reduced to ashes in the flames, no matter whether it was Nanao, Rinjaku, Suifeng, or Tashiro, they all couldn't help but have a stiffened expression. Especially Nanao, she even started worrying about him mid-battle. Obviously he had become their enemy, but she still couldn't hold back the emotions in her heart and started worrying about him. Fortunately, in an instant, Mizuru's body condensed again, and appeared behind Yamamoto. Mizuru beckoned, and a blood-red long sword appeared in his hand, stabbing towards Yamamoto's back. Useless tricks. Words came out of Yamamoto's lips, carrying a hint of little disdain. Ignoring Mizuru who was attacking from behind. Blazing flames rose instantly, and a terrifying temperature permeated the air. The blazing flames covered Yamamoto's body like a piece of clothing. The blood-red long sword in Mizuru's hand touched the flames on Yamamoto's body, and turned to ashes, and then, even his whole body seemed unable to bear the terrifying flames, and evaporated. Yamamoto's deep voice sounded. Zanken no Tiki, Nishi, Zanjitsugakui, longsword of the Remnant Flame, West, Remnant Sun Prison Garb. This move was to turn his own spiritual pressure into massive flames of 15 million degrees Celsius, and then turning it into a piece of clothing that covers his entire body and blade. At this moment, his body and blade was the same as being wrapped in the sun. This was also the only defensive skill he possessed after his Bankai. Though, it was not just a defense at all, but it shrank the brutal offensive means of Zanken no Tiki as his own body's garb, thus using its offense as a defense. With a Zanjitsugakui, no enemy could ever touch him. It was 15 million degrees of flame, nothing could withstand it. For example, Mizuru just attempted to attack Yamamoto, but was burnt to ashes by the Zanjitsugakui worn by Yamamoto, which was the best depiction of its use. Mizuru's figure reappeared again. He didn't seem to care about the matter of dying suddenly under the flames before, and once again attacked Yamamoto. Yamamoto didn't dodge or tried to counterattack, allowing Mizuru to attack smoothly. On his body, the Zanjutsu Gakui swayed slightly, like a piece of clothing. However, this piece of clothing was a more terrifying technique than the Kyoku Jitsujin and the Kakaju Manakushi Daisojin. Mizuru, who just got close to Yamamoto, was again directly burned and evaporated under the flames. Like I said, it's useless. Yamamoto's voice sounded. Under my Zanjutsu Gakui, you can't get close to me no matter what you do, and all your attack methods are useless against me in this state, so you should just wait for your death. Chapter 328, The Brutal Zanken no Teki. Wait for my death? Sorry, but that is not my style. Mizuru's voice sounded. He was very well aware of the horror of the Zanjutsu Gakui Yamamoto was using. If the Shinigami and Raikars in the distance only felt that they were in a furnace after Yamamoto activated Zanjutsu Gakui, then what Mizuru was feeling was, standing in the middle of a purgatory. It was extremely hot, even the blood in his body might be evaporated cleanly with the slightest mistake, so he who was close at hand could far better understand the horror of Zanjutsu Gakui. Although he didn't know that this move of Yamamoto's would literally put the sun as a garb on his body, he could feel that the temperature of the golden layer of flames covering Yamamoto's body at this moment was horribly high. If he continued to attack at close quarters, he was afraid that before he could even get close to him, he would be evaporated by Zanjutsu Gakui on his body. Therefore, Mizuru immediately planned to open up distance between them, and with a thought, he carried out space transference in the enchantment. Then, a deep chant sounded. Seeping crest of turbidity. Arrogant vessel of lunacy. Boil forth and deny. Groanum and flicker. Disrupt sleep. Crawling queen of iron. Eternally self-destructing dull of mud. Unite. Repulse. Fill with soil and know your own powerlessness. Hado number 90, Black Coffin. Aizen's favorite Kido, Kurihitsugi, was casted by Mizuru, but it was not like Aizen, who liked to give up the chanting. As a matter of course, the casting speed Kurihitsugi that forgoes the chant would be faster, but correspondingly, its power would only be 1/3 of the full chanted one. Facing Yamamoto, who was wearing Zanjutsu Gakui, Mizuru would not be so arrogant to give up the chanting. As for buying the time for this chanting, as his thoughts moved, the sea of blood surged, constantly blocking Yamamoto's path. Although the surging blood wave couldn't stop the high temperature of Zanjutsu Gakui, and was even evaporated immediately when it touched the Zanjutsu Gakui, it still delayed Yamamoto for a moment and successfully bought time for him. While wearing Zanjutsu Gakui, he rushed towards Mizuru. A black cube rose from the ground, instantly covering Yamamoto's body, and then, countless shadow blades stabbed out, intending to penetrate Yamamoto in the black cube. Of course, this was the normal development, but it's a pity that the current head captain was anything but normal while using the Zanjutsu Gakui. After wearing Zanjutsu Gakui, Yamamoto doesn't need extremely high speed, nor does he need any exquisite skills. Just relying on Zanjutsu Gakui, he could burn all the enemies to ashes. The kind of burning to ashes he was now referring to was not just the real living targets, even those things that have no life or physical form could be burned to ashes. Kurihitsugi trapped Yamamoto for a moment, and then, it evaporated completely. Yamamoto, without any change, appeared from it. No matter what you throw at me, it's useless. My Zanjutsu Gakui can even evaporate the spirit seeds itself. Kido attacks, in the final analysis, are nothing more than a spiritual energy-based attack. The Zanken no Teki in his hand pointed at Mizuru from afar. It's over, Kyo Mizuru. Another slash was sent out. The space was distorted under the terrifying high temperature carried by the slash. Mizuru only felt a burning sword pressure enveloping his body. But as soon as it came face to him, half of his body disappeared. Then, he condensed his body again. Yamamoto seemed to have made up his mind. Since he couldn't break the enchantment, he would just keep killing Mizuru. Just when Mizuru's figure had just condensed, Yamamoto's body flashed, and the Zanken no Teki turned Mizuru into ashes again. As the head captain of 13 Division of Imperial Guards, his strength was not only so overwhelming because he owned the oldest and strongest Zanpakuto of the fire department. Since the establishment of 13 Division of Imperial Guards, Yamamoto had been in the Syriite AI for thousands of years. Even before that, who knows how many battles he had experienced. Soul's society might be at times in decline, but it would quickly regain its vitality and return to its peak state, all because of him as the pillar. His sword art, hand-to-hand combats, flash steps and Kido were all at the top level, and his spiritual pressure was so powerful that it could even be compared with the monster Kinpachi Zaraki. In just a short moment, Yamamoto relied on the invincible buff brought by Zanjutsu Gakui and his own exquisite skills to kill Mizuru several times. He's like a demon, who was solely focused on slaughtering his enemy. Maintaining Bankai for a longer time, maintaining the Zanjitsu Gakui, none of it seemed to have any influence on him. For a while, every time Mizuru showed up, he was killed by Yamamoto even before he could persist for a moment. It was like the time before when he fought Zaraki. But, this time was different from the last battle of Las Noches. That battle could be seen as Mizuru honing Byakuya and testing the level of Kinpachi Zaraki at his full capacity. This battle was simply because Yamamoto was too strong. But Mizuru didn't care. If it comes to death, this number of deaths were far less than the deaths he experienced when he practiced against Kaino Kawa in his Zanpakuto space at nights. Mizuru's figure reappeared, and a calm voice sounded. "Captain, I must say that you are quite cruel. Are you sure that you don't want to turn and take a look at the rest of the people?" This battle was not just between Mizuru and Yamamoto, but also between Hueco Mundo and Soul Society. While Mizuru was fighting against Yamamoto, the rest of the people were also fighting amongst themselves. The situation faced by many Shinigami was more difficult than imagined. Those ordinary Shinigami who were present but had not participated in the war were fine, as all they had to do was to deal with their own rebellious Zanpakuto. But the Shinigami who participated in the war, in addition to the enemies in front of them, their Zanpakuto had also betrayed, which made them unable to use the abilities of their Zanpakuto, and even had to deal with the rebellious Zanpakuto in addition to the enemies in front of them. When Yamamoto was busy chopping Mizuru, these Shinigami were more or less injured, looking quite miserable. The only exception was probably Zaraki. His Zanpakuto had never betrayed. He had been pressing Grimmjow to fight while Grimmjow was constantly complaining that if he knew about Zaraki's craziness, he would not have chosen him as his opponent. What a shame. When Yamamoto turned his head and saw such a scene, he couldn't help but scold. Shunsi, who was avoiding Stark's Serometrolita attack and Kaden Kikotsu's harassment at the same time, couldn't help but laugh wryly when he heard Yamamoto's voice. "Old man Yama, are you really serious? Do you think anyone can subdue their Zanpakuto like you did with Rijin Jakka?" Moreover, the materialized Kaden Kikotsu was a woman. He was reluctant very to commit this kind of cruelty. Yamamoto scolded all the Shinigami, but the action of his hand did not stop. With a flash of his figure, he took the initiative to rush to Shinigami's aid. His target was very clear. He went directly to Muramasa, who was surrounded by lavender light. The old guy's mind is really on point. When Yamamoto was attacking Muramasa, Mizuru's figure condensed again, and sighed softly as he got a moment of free time. Even though he had been killed so many times by Yamamoto, and even couldn't scratch him because of his Zanjitsu Gakui, he didn't have any intention of panicking. After all, no one knew that he still had a trump card. Chapter 329, Shizuma Sekai. Yamamoto's goal was very clear, or rather, he already knew Muramasa very well. These Zanpakuto's rebellions were all because of Muramasa. Although the Zanpakutos could be subdued again by defeating them, it would take too much time to subdue them one by one. Therefore, instead of that, it was better to solve the culprit that caused all this, Muramasa. Zankan no Tiki, Higashi, Kyoku Jitsujin. Yamamoto, dressed in Zanjitsu Gakui, came to Muramasa's side in an instant. After Muramasa realized Yamamoto's purpose, he used his power to confuse the Zanpakuto in his hand once again, but unfortunately he failed, and so, he then was about to escape, but the terrifying aura locked him from afar. He only felt that the surrounding space was all distorted under the insanely high temperature, making it difficult for him to even move an inch. He could only look desperately at the Zankanotaki slashing towards him. No. Just when the Kyoku Jitsujin was about to hit him and completely annihilate his soul attached to Mizuru's Benkei, the ground where he stood surged with blood, swallowing his body instantly. With the disappearance of Muramasa, the purple light that permeated the blood mist also disappeared, and those Zanpakuto who rebelled because of Muramasa's power and concretized into reality, also appeared in a trance for a moment, and then woke up, realizing what they had done. With a look of self-blame on their faces, they disappeared immediately. The Shinigami immediately found themselves with their Zanpakuto's abilities intact. Although they were injured by Rankars and their Zanpakuto before, were in a difficult situation. But now the most difficult period had passed, and they were confident to push back the disadvantageous situation. Of course, though all of the Shinigami Zanpakuto's abilities were back. Because of the influence of Yamamoto's Banchi, many Shinigami were forced to be in a steamer-like environment, and those Zanpakuto of water and ice systems directly lost their abilities to create or manipulate flowing water, ice and snow. Here one had to say that Rijin Jakka was really an overwhelming Zanpakuto, as long as others' spiritual pressure was lower than Yamamoto's. After he releases his Benkei, all Zanpakuto with conflicting attributes would be suppressed. Hiran Mauru was the strongest Zanpakuto in the ice and snow department. Although Tashiro's spiritual pressure was not bad, it was obviously not as good as Yamamoto's, and the same goes for Sojiro, who was opposite him. Both of them just couldn't use their abilities to their fullest anymore. Barely maintaining the state of Shike, the two of them continued fighting. In a trance, both of them couldn't help but think of the battle that was carried out under the compulsion of Central 46 back then. In that battle, Sojiro was the first to abandon his friendship and took the initiative to swing his sword at Dashiro. He thought he would surely get the victory and would become the only holder of Hiren Mauru. In the end, he lost. After years of honing in Hueco Mundo, he also reflected on it and realized that he failed because he was too arrogant and underestimated Tashiro, thinking that the other party was younger and his strength would not be as good as him. Fighting again today, he, who had learned the lessons of the past, had become extremely serious and cautious. He would never lose this battle. Apart from Hiren Mauru, Sodeno Shirayuki in Rukia's hand was affected even more. All the ice and even the water vapor in the air had evaporated, and Sodeno Shirayuki didn't have Hiren Mauru's skill of controlling weather, so it directly became an Asaki. Even the basic Shikai couldn't be maintained. Of course, everyone else was also weakened to various degrees. After Shujuku's Zanpakuto's rebellion, he felt extremely difficult. But now that his Zanpakuto had returned to normal, he couldn't wait to fight in the environment created by Yamamoto's Bankai. According to his preliminary estimates, the power of his Zanpakuto had been fully enhanced by 30%. This was all due to the environmental bonus brought after Rijin Jaka's Bankai. On the other hand, Haribel's Resurrection, because of it being of the water system, it could not produce even a drop of water in this space, and was greatly suppressed, even though the Rancor does not over-rely on their swords like Shinigami. But it's a fact that she's weakened. It seems that the situation has been reversed, and is currently in our favor. Shujuku had injuries, some of which were brought after his Zanpakuto's rebellion, and the others were brought by Haribel, but now, after his Zanpakuto returned to normal, facing the suppressed Haribel, he was full of confidence. Humphrey. Haribel snorted coldly, ignoring Shujuku's smug attitude. After Yamamoto solved the problem brought by Muramasa, he turned around again and went to kill Mizuru. You are really vigorous and resolute for your age. Mizuru made another comment on the head captain. It's almost time. Almost? Almost time for what? Yamamoto attacked with a slash, while pondering the intent behind that sentence. The Zanka no Teki in his hand swung out, and Mizuru's figure disappeared. But, this time, it wasn't evaporated completely under the terrifying high temperature of Zanka no Teki, but he just disappeared abruptly. Where has he gone? Left? Or right? Yamamoto immediately started sensing him with the help of his spiritual power. It was no secret that Mizuru had the ability to teleport in this space, but even if it was teleportation, as long as he moved fast enough, he could still deal a fatal blow to him the very moment he appears. Previously, Yamamoto relied on his keen senses to instantly kill Mizuru without giving him the slightest chance to react. But this time, Yamamoto found something wrong. Mizuru neither appeared on the left, nor on the right, nor behind him. Instead, he appeared in the sky above. The concentration of spirits in the air of Hueco Mundo was higher than that of Soul Society. Shinigami could not walk in the sky in Soul Society, let alone Hueco Mundo. Only in places where the concentration of spirit particles was extremely low, like in the world of living, could Shinigami walk in the sky recklessly. Normally, if a Shinigami wanted to fly, they need to have a special Zanpakuto like Hiren Mauru, which in its liberated form had a pair of wings, or Anohana's Minazuki, which in its liberated form becomes a giant, green, one-eyed manta ray-like creature that could be used for transportation, with the ability to fly. Now that Mizuru was suddenly suspended in the air, it made people a little surprised. But this was his enchantment, which was formed after his Benkei, so it doesn't seem too strange. Immediately afterwards, Mizuru's body began to disintegrate. Raindrops suddenly fell from the sky. The drops were blood red, it was a rain of blood. Even though Yamamoto realized something was very wrong the moment the rain fell, and then he swung his sword to make its terrifying high temperature swept across, intending to evaporate the rain. But at the same time as the rain fell, the ground also turned slightly, as if a sea of blood was flooding. Immediately afterwards, all the existences in that enchantment, whether Shinigami, Rancors, or a special human such as Bounce, they all felt that their spiritual pressure was being extracted by this space, and their whole body became difficult to even move, as if they was about to sink. Chapter 330, Indiscriminate Attack. What's wrong? What's happening to me? These were the thoughts of the ordinary Shinigami who found themselves unable to move an inch. Obviously, when the blood-red rain started falling, they found something was going to happen and tried to avoid it as much as possible. As a result, they only paid attention to the changes in the sky, but ignored the changes in the ground. Crimson threads had started entwining with their bodies climbing from their feet. The moment the crimson threads touched their feet, they found that they had become weak all over, the spiritual pressure in their bodies were being absorbed, and then they started sinking standing in their positions, as if their whole body became heavier. The land, no, following Mizuru's figure flying in the air, it was no longer even land, the whole place was constantly swaying and rippling, like a crimson ocean. What did this guy do? Sejun raised his head, looked at Mizuru in the sky, and couldn't help but question. Opposite him, Kaname had an ugly expression. Because he found himself in no better situation than Sejun. At the moment when the ground rippled, his body also became unable to move an inch, and the spiritual pressure in his body was also being drawn out. Neither the Shinigami's spiritual pressure nor the Hollow's spiritual pressure could escape the fate of being absorbed. Is this your trump card? Shunsei whispered to himself, a complex emotion flashed in his eyes. After Yamamoto released his Bankai and used the Zanjutsu Gakui, when Shunsei saw his whole body wrapped in flames, he thought of the portrait he had seen when he had sneaked into the private quarters of the head captain when he was a teenager. For that reason, Yamamoto had scolded him like always. But then Yamamoto also told him something, which basically meant that it was a monster that appeared a long time ago when Soul Society was in crisis, but the appearance of this monster made Soul Society fall into a deeper danger of destruction. Then he mentioned that if this monster showed up again, it would mean that he, Yamamoto, might never be able to return smoothly. Shunsei didn't understand what that meant at first, no rather, he hadn't understood the meaning of those words before Yamamoto released his Bankai in this Hueco Mundo decisive battle. It wasn't until he showed his Banchi, wearing the Zanjutsu Gakui, which looked exactly like the one in the painting, that Shunsei understood exactly what it meant. As early as the beginning of this battle, Yamamoto had already made up his mind. After realizing this, Shunsei's mood began to become increasingly complicated. Because although Mizuru had committed a grave felony, after all, his relationship with Nanao was a fact. If Yamamoto really killed Mizuru, he didn't know how much Nanao would be affected. But on the other hand, Shunsei's family was also one of the upper-class nobles of the Soul Society. Mizuru brazenly wiped out most of the nobles. So, he, who was also born in the nobility, and had enjoyed many conveniences brought by the status of nobility, must also do his due duty. All kinds of thoughts swirled in Shunsei's mind and he was ready to see this through, but immediately afterwards, Mizuru's so many methods that were showcased were beyond Shunsei's or rather everyone's expectations. First, Muramasa showed up and brought great trouble to the Soul Society's side. Mizuru's immortality and spatial transference abilities were no longer a big secret, but no one ever thought that Mizuru could summon the souls of the ones died under his blade to fight. This was another ability that they hadn't been seen before. However, after Yamamoto released his Bankai, Shunsei didn't think that Mizuru would be able to make a comeback. They had already seen the horror of the Zanjutsu Gakui, they would be burned to ashes just by getting close to it. Especially one of Mizuru's previous trump cards, Muramasa, was directly chopped off by Yamamoto. The rebellious Zanpakutos returned to normal, which meant that the situation had once again quietly reversed, and Mizuru had lost a major advantage. If he doesn't have a better way to deal with the Yamamoto's Banchi, then in this battle, he could only wait for defeat. Maybe he could be resurrected many times by relying on the enchantment, but Yamamoto knew that he had the ability to get resurrect, but he still chose to deal with him in that way, so he must be sure of defeating him. In the end, once again when no one expected, Mizuru performed another extreme move without making any sound. His body turned into a dripping rain of blood, and no one knew what he was going at the moment. But no one cared about it anymore. Because they found that his spiritual pressure was being swallowed and their bodies were sinking. With their spiritual pressure gone, it won't be long before even Shikai couldn't be maintained. Oh dear, you are really cruel. Shunsei noticed one thing. The changes in the situation was not only aimed at Shinigami, but also the forces of Hueco Mundo opposite to them. Even the Hueco Mundo's forces were struggling hard to get rid of this engulfing feeling, but still they couldn't do it. Karaya Jin on Bounce's side even cursed angrily. Kyo Mizuru. You bastard. It never occurred to him that they, the Bounce, who worked tirelessly for Mizuru, would be backstabbed like this. Jin let the blood-red thread entangle himself, devouring his spiritual pressure, and couldn't help but softly say, "Oh my, what should I do?" Having said that, his expression hadn't even changed much, let alone panic. In the end, if it wasn't for Mizuru's rescue, he should have died in Aizen's hands and have been a dead man long ago. It was precisely because he survived after being so close to death that he had already taken very light view on the matter of life and death. Even if Mizuru was really cruel and planned to kill all the Shinigamis of Soul Society and the forces of Hueco Mundo then and there, he doesn't really care. Although it seemed to be a very ruthless move. But in this way, he would at least be able to win, wouldn't he? His eyes swept across Su Ifeng, and Ranjaku in front of him. These two female Shinigami who had a close relationship with Mizuru were also caught in the same unprecedented predicament due to the changes in the environment, and were also trying their best to resist. The feeling of getting their spiritual pressure devoured and sinking was not a nice one. The rest of the Shinigami were not much better. Finally, his eyes fell on Yamamoto. Faced with the dilemma encountered by the Soul Society, what choice would you make? It seemed that because of the Zanjutsu Gakui, which produced terrifying high temperature and permeated from Yamamoto's body, the changes in the environment did not have much impact on him. Yamamoto was also aware of the changes in the situation, although he doesn't know how Mizuru did it. But obviously, in order to win, Mizuru had become inhumane. He did not hesitate to abandon everything, all friendship, love, and directly used such an indiscriminate move. Yamamoto looked around. It seems that the progression of everyone's spiritual pressure being swallowed is denoted by how much of their bodies had synced. If things go on like this, it will definitely be a very bad situation. Yamamoto couldn't help but look at Zaraki. Captain Zaraki, are you okay? Zaraki turned his head. Not very good. These things are interfering with my fight. If you still have power, activate your Bankai and break this barrier with me. Chapter 331, Beelzebub uses Gabriel. People are fickle, and the same goes for Yamamoto. Before, when Mizuru had opened up the barrier, he thought that he could destroy the barrier without Zaraki's Bankai. However, after the Kyoku Jitsujin was fruitless, he realized that the barrier was much more stable than he had imagined, so he decisively changed his plan of action, and formulated that he would keep killing Mizuru at a speed at which his speed of devouring spiritual power could not keep up. If the speed of Mizuru's resurrection could not be increased, he would soon be unable to maintain the barrier, and the barrier would disintegrate at its own without any attack. But now, he found that he was wrong in this matter too. The purpose of Mizuru opening up the barrier was not for the ability of resurrection that he had been continuously using from the beginning, nor was it to defeat him with the advantage brought to him by his resurrections. It was to bury the entire army of the Soul Society then and there. In order to defeat this Hueco Mundo expeditionary force, he didn't even plan to let go of those rankars of Hueco Mundo. Mizuru's figure disappeared without a trace, and the whole inner world of the barrier changed. In there, Shinigami, hollows, bounce and spiritual pressure were being swallowed by the Crimson World, and that feeling of swallowing gave them a sense of inevitability. If things went on like that, it was certain that all the living creatures inside the entire barrier would absorb cleanly. Yamamoto doesn't care about the Hueco Mundo side's life or death, but he had to care about Shinigami's lives. After all, he was the one who brought these Shinigami there, so he was obliged to take them back. So, everything went back to the beginning. There was only one way to break Mizuru's move of absorbing all the living beings inside the barrier, and that was to break the barrier itself. Mizuru's figure had disappeared, and seemed to have merged into the vast Crimson World, but the barrier was still there. After Yamamoto released his Bankai, he still had the strongest attack yet to use, but he didn't rush to use it. It's not that he was unsure of breaking the barrier by using it. Rather, it was for stability. That was the last and strongest blow, which he would use to secure the victory in one fell swoop. So, his eyes fell on Zaraki. Zaraki also responded quickly. Although the Crimson World had changed drastically, and Zaraki's body also had many blood-red silk threads climbing onto him, and absorbing his spiritual pressure, but his spiritual pressure was far stronger than others. Although he felt that his spiritual pressure was being absorbed, he felt that it would take a long time before he would feel weakened due to it. So, after hearing the Yamamoto's words, though Zaraki was perplexed as he didn't understand why the Yamamoto asked him to release his Bankai suddenly, he still did it. Granted, Zaraki didn't like the feeling after releasing his Bankai. Bankai. Even though his spiritual pressure was continuously being sucked, after he released his Bankai, a tremendously powerful spiritual pressure still burst out from his body. Seemingly aware of the high-intensity spiritual pressure reaction, the blood mist surged and gradually condensed into a cocoon, intending to wrap Zaraki heavily, and continue to devour his spiritual pressure, but... Thump boom. A burly figure broke through the blood mist. It was Zaraki, who had turned into a beast once again. He was in a state of confusion, but even so, he still remembered the last words of the head captain. His figure jumped out once again, and in an instant, he had come to the barrier's inner wall. The huge Zanpakuto in his hand waved, intending to imitate the move that he used during the Battle of Las Noches last time and break the barrier. Bang! Zaraki swung a blow containing all his strength, and a thunderous sound echoed. Even though many Shinigami's consciousness had begun to blur because of their spiritual power being swallowed up, many of them were still struggling. Shinigami with relatively high spiritual power levels still couldn't help but glance at the direction of Zaraki's attack. Unfortunately, it had failed. The barrier that Zaraki tried his best to break like the last time seemed to be stronger this time. Even though Zaraki went all out, he still couldn't break the barrier. Is this it? Is everything going to end like this? Byakuya was not reconciled. He never thought that Zaraki would not be able to break Mizuru's barrier even after releasing his monstrous Bankai. In the end, even Mizuru had disappeared from their sight completely. After the Soul Society sent a huge army to fight him, would they end like this even without able to do anything? We came to Hueco Mundo to crusade against evil. How could the curtain be drawn like this? Yamamoto's strong voice sounded. In the Crimson World, there was once again a burning feeling. He poured more spiritual pressure in the Zanjitsu Gakui that he was already wearing, and flew past everyone. In an instant, he came to Zaraki's side and swung his sword at the exact same spot where Zaraki's attack was made, stacking up the damage. Zankan no Tiki, Kita, Tenshai Kaijin, long sword of the remnant flame, north, heaven and earth and in ashes. A brutally destructive and fast attack was released by Yamamoto. The barrier that Zaraki had tried his best to strike and break but was unable to do so, now with this attack, had a large of its area disappear directly. With such a huge gap appeared. The entire barrier finally collapsed. Crack crash, it was as if Kyoka Suigetsu's hypnosis was undone. A figure emerged quietly. It was Mizuru, whose complexion was extremely pale at that moment. Before many Shinigami realized what had happened, they realized one fact, that the Crimson World had disappeared. Although the feeling of weakness still existed, the spiritual power in their bodies did not get absorbed any longer. We are saved. The Shinigami wiped their foreheads, only to find that there was not a single drop of sweat. After Yamamoto had released his Benkei, all the moisture in the atmosphere had evaporated, and they didn't even have saliva, let alone sweat. Previously, they felt that the environment after his Benkei was simply not suitable for human beings, but after experiencing the feelings brought about by Mizuru's barrier's inner changes, they felt that the environment after their head captain's Benkei was relatively much comfortable. Although they were physically uncomfortable, looking at Yamamoto's Benkei gave them a sense of psychological security. Old man Yama is as dependable as always. Shunsei also couldn't help but comment. Then, after seeing Mizuru's appearance clearly, his eyes became sharp. Mizuru. Looking at Mizuru's appearance, Nanao couldn't help but speak softly. At this moment, Mizuru's complexion was pale, and he looked as if he had suffered a serious injury. What's worth mentioning was that the Zanpakuto in his hand was broken, leaving only half of it. In the state of Benkei, the damages Zanpakuto receives cannot be recovered. Now, you probably have lost the power of your Zanpakuto. Yamamoto looked at Mizuru's Zanpakuto, which was obviously damaged, and spoke with an indifferent voice. Mizuru's Benkei turned his Zanpakuto into a barrier, while his Tenshai Kaijin completely wiped out the things he slashed, making it impossible to regenerate them. He used Tenshai Kaijin to slash the barrier before, and the barrier suffered irreversible damage, and when it reverted back to Zanpakuto, it became what was now in Mizuru's hand. As the head captain of 13 Division of Imperial Guards, Yamamoto knows a lot of common sense which are not very common about Shinigami. This was one of them. The damages Zanpakuto had suffered while in Benkei is irreversible and cannot be recovered. Of course, there were exceptions, such as Kamimura Sejin's Benkei. But Yamamoto didn't believe that Mizuru's sword was a special case like it. Mizuru's expression was a bit ugly, and he didn't respond to Yamamoto's words. It seemed like he was hit at a sore spot by Yamamoto. Seeing this, Yamamoto concluded that his inference was true, and was ready to attack Mizuru again. But suddenly at that moment, a red-haired figure appeared beside Mizuru. It was Beelzebub, the leader of the Espada. After he appeared next to Mizuru, several tentacles suddenly shot out from his back, and then entangled him. This was something no one expected. Soon, the sum of Rankars recognized the trick. It's Zalapro's Gabriel. Beelzebub had performed Gabriel on Mizuru, and simultaneously a thought arose. Beelzebub betrayed Mizuru. Chapter 332, Complete Soul. This was a scene that no one expected. Previously, Mizuru led almost all of the strong Rankars from the Lost Nashas to come there to start a decisive battle against the Soul Society, but one of the top fighters was missing. That was Beelzebub at the head of the Espada. This had aroused the suspicion of many Shinigami who had fought against Beelzebub previously. As a result, no one thought that Beelzebub would appear in such a situation. He didn't appear early, nor did he appear late, but at the exact time after Mizuru's barrier was destroyed. And as soon as he appeared, he launched a fatal backstab on Mizuru. Looking at Mizuru, who was entangled by the tentacles, and his breath became more and more sluggish. Nanao subconsciously wanted to make a move. On the other side, Suifeng, who was entangled with Jin, also wanted to rush to Mizuru's side with her high mobility to help him. Although Mizuru was their enemy, but her purpose was to bring him back to the Soul Society, and to let him accept Soul Society's trial. So before that, it was very reasonable to prevent Mizuru from dying at the hands of an Rankar. Right? Unfortunately, Jin doesn't seem to care about Mizuru's life or death. In plain words, it seemed that it was out of revenge for trapping him earlier. At that moment, after realizing Suifeng's intentions, he resolutely stood in front of her. Not only he blocked Suifeng, but he also blocked Rinjaku. His strength had been clearly revealed in the previous battles, and he was a well-deserved captain-class Shinigami. Although he was only a vice-captain during his time in 13th Division of Imperial Guards, Su Yifeng firmly believed that Jin's strength was even stronger than what he was showing in that fight. Among the captains of 13th Division of Imperial Guards, he could definitely be regarded as the forefront. But at this moment, neither Su Yifeng nor Rinjaku was in the mood to pay attention to Jin's strength. "Jin, get out of the way." Rinjaku still had much to talk with Jin, but at that moment, saving Mizuru was the priority, so she had to bypass him. But even if that was the intention, Jin still chose to block them. On the surface, it indeed seemed that Beelzebub used Gabriel on Mizuru, but in the real Karakura town earlier, he got a peek into the relationship between Beelzebub and Mizuru, which made him have some thoughts. The truth of the matter was definitely not as simple as Beelzebub backstabbing Mizuru. Although he didn't know what Mizuru wanted to do, but after his Zanpakuto was damaged under the Bankai state, this might be his way of turning things around. Other than them, it was not only one or two Shinigami wanted to stop Beelzebub. Although many people gritted their teeth with anger for Mizuru's betrayal, they all agreed on one point, which was, Mizuru was a traitor to the Soul Society and must be brought back to the Soul Society for trial. He must not be allowed to die at the hands of an Rancor before then. Anyway, they absolutely do not admit that they were trying to help and protect Mizuru. Yamamoto did the same after realizing Beelzebub's actions. His figure flashed, and the Zanken no Teki in his hands became ready to slash out. Before even he got close to Beelzebub, Beelzebub felt a burning sensation. Beelzebub didn't even look at Yamamoto, and with a wave of his hand, a cloud of black mist filled the air, and the burning temperature that was close to him immediately decayed and disappeared. Even if the speed of decaying was very slow, it was still restrained in the end. Is that the Espada Baragon's ability? In the last battle, Yamamoto had also seen some of Beelzebub's abilities, and knew that he could devour other Hollow's abilities for his own use. During the last battle, Beelzebub had devoured Baragon. The aging, decaying power of Baragon was being fully demonstrated at that moment. Immediately, his expression changed into an ugly one. Because Mizuru's body, which was entangled by Beelzebub's tentacles, suddenly started disintegrating and collapsing. Mizuru. Seeing this scene, Nanao finally couldn't hold back. Regardless of what the Shinigamis next to her thought of her, she shouted loudly. The expressions of Su Yifeng and Ranjaku were also very bad at the same time. On the Rankar's side, Haribol and Niliel also had very bad expressions. Stark's expression was much better than them. Beelzebub's betrayal reminded him of Baragon's death. This isn't that guy's first act of betrayal. But what could he do? He couldn't do anything that would change anything at this point. Of course, if there was any way to mend things, Stark would have preferred to kill Beelzebub the first time he had met him. And so, Mizuru's body disintegrated, beyond everyone's expectations. This was not within Mizuru's barrier after releasing his Bankai. In that barrier, it didn't matter if his body disintegrates and he dies countless times, he had the ability to resurrect. But right now, his Zanpakuto had suffered irreversible damage in its Bankai state, and had withdrawn from its Bankai state. His body disintegrated in such a situation. Did he die just like that? Seeing Mizuru die, many people were in a daze. Some could not accept this fact. Immediately, Beelzebub's body, which was wrapped around Mizuru with its tentacles, causing Mizuru's body to disintegrate and die, also started disintegrating and looked like he too was going to die soon. This. Are they going to die together? Some people couldn't help but have this kind of thought. After Beelzebub's body disintegrated, a dripping blood color light was immediately released, and then wrapped his and Mizuru's disintegrated body at the same time, forming a blood-red cocoon. The blood-colored cocoon only lasted for a moment, and in the next instant, it suddenly burst open. A figure walked out of it. After seeing the figure walking out of it, the Shinigami and Rankars who were shocked by Mizuru's death before were stunned once again. Because it was Mizuru who walked out of it. How can it be? Mizuru obviously died in the hands of Beelzebub, they saw it with their own eyes. But, it was Mizuru who walked out of the cocoon. Or, is it that after Beelzebub devoured Mizuru, he chose to use Mizuru's physical appearance? Seeing the figure walking out of the blood-colored cocoon, who looked exactly like Mizuru, except for his red eyes, everyone on the battleground were stunned. Stark was silent for a long time, then he thought of a possibility, and couldn't help but say. You really surprised me this time. As an independent Rancor, Stark once fell into endless loneliness because he was too powerful. In order to alleviate this loneliness, he split himself into two individuals, namely Stark and Lilinette. Right now, Mizuru was swallowed by Beelzebub, and a new Mizuru was born from the blood-red cocoon. This phenomenon made him think of a possibility. Mizuru and Beelzebub were most likely the same person. As for why Mizuru wasn't just devoured by Beelzebub, Stark's instinct was more inclined to the former. There was no way for Mizuru to fall at Beelzebub's hand. This feeling. That my soul is no longer incomplete, honestly, I have missed it for a damn long time. Mizuru, who came out of the light cocoon, glanced at Yamamoto, and spoke. Chapter 333, Mizuru's Sword Liberation. First, Beelzebub stabbed Mizuru in the back, and then after he devoured Mizuru, it was Mizuru who came out of the blood-red cocoon. Things changed so fast that even Yamamoto didn't have time to process it easily. It wasn't until he heard Mizuru's words that he came back to his senses, looked at Mizuru in front of him, and said in an extremely indifferent voice. Accepting the power of hollows? Kyo Mizuru, how low you have fallen. Although he didn't understand the process, in the end, he could still see that Mizuru and the rancor named Beelzebub had merged into one. For this kind of thing, in the Soul Society, there was another term, called hollowification. About the hollowification incident, which caused the disappearances of all those souls that year, after Aizen betrayed, Gisuke and others were whitewashed from that guilt. Especially during the battle in Karakura town, those captains and vice-captains who were persecuted by Aizen showed up to fight against him, and so, for today's Soul Society, this was no secret anymore. The principle is to pour Hollow's soul into a Shinigami's soul and try to sublimate the target to a higher level of soul by destroying the boundaries between souls. There were two conditions to get and use hollowification. First, one must possess a huge amount of spiritual pressure, at least vice-captain level and above spiritual pressure, otherwise, they would be swallowed by the unstable spiritual pressure brought by hollow. Second, one must meet his hollow self in his body and defeat it. These two conditions were indispensable, otherwise it was impossible to successfully hollowify. Although Beelzebub was an rancor and the leader of Espada, in the final analysis, he was also a hollow. He swallowed Mizuru, a Shinigami, into his body, and in turn, it could be seen that he merged into Mizuru's body. This undoubtedly provided a second condition for achieving hollowification. There was now a hollow inside Mizuru's body. As long as he defeated it, he could master the power of hollow and complete his hollowification. As for the first condition, having a huge amount of spiritual pressure. For Mizuru, it could not be said to be even a condition. However, although it could be seen that Mizuru has accepted Hollow's power and carried out the hollowification, Yamamoto still had doubts in his mind. Did Beelzebub devour Mizuru before, only to be suppressed by Mizuru in turn, or did Beelzebub voluntarily dedicated his life for Mizuru and became his strength? If it was the latter, why was Rancor, that to the head of the Espada, such a powerful entity, willing to sacrifice for Mizuru? Fallen? I don't think so. Mizuru responded to Yamamoto. In your opinion, who was Beelzebub? Was he a hollow? A hollow who was rancorized? And now, that I have accepted his power and merged with him, you think I have opted hollowification and voluntarily gave up the glory of being a Shinigami and so? Mizuru asked questions Yamamoto one after another. Without waiting for Yamamoto to respond, Mizuru took the initiative to answer these questions himself. You don't understand. Beelzebub, he was originally a part of me from the beginning. Right now, I'm just taking back the power that I've separated all those years ago back into my body. This was also the reason why he valued Szayelipro very much at the beginning. Even if he killed Szayelipro, he kept his body with him all the time. Because his own soul was incomplete. But after so many years, with that part of his soul occupying a dominant position in Metastasis' body, and then evolving into Beelzebub step by step, it was not so easy to take this part of the power back into his body and integrate it without any problems. After all, there were all kinds of strange hollows in Mundo, and they had all kinds of strange abilities. Just like Szayelipro's Gabriel. It was an ability to devour all the power of the target and all the nutrients in its body, and then create a new body for the caster itself. For Szayelipro, it's a means of fighting the enemy. But from Mizuru's point of view, it was a way for him to take back the power he had divided without any risks or problems. After Beelzebub devoured Szayelipro's body, he possessed Szayelipro's Gabriel. Then, with the help of that same technique, Mizuru's body was devoured, and at the same time, Beelzebub's body belonging to category of hollow was decomposed. The two divided souls reunited as one. Then, in the old body where Mizuru and Beelzebub were mixed together, with the ability of Gabriel, all the spiritual power was extracted to create a brand new body out of thin air. Yamamoto didn't understand the process, and neither did the other rancors of Mundo. But they all heard Mizuru's words. Especially for those rancors, it was even more of a shocking fact. Beelzebub, the head of Espada, turned out to be a part of Mizuru. They have all seen the power of Beelzebub. Such a powerful rancor is only a part or maybe a half of Mizuru. The Shinigami side doesn't know when Beelzebub was born though. But after learning the fact after his partition of power, they soon realized a certain reality. Then you. In the fight in Las Noches earlier, and you even before and after that, only have been fighting with half of your power? Byakuya couldn't help clenching his fists, his nails were deeply embedded in the flesh, and his complexion was extremely bad. Even if the you in front of us is your complete vessel, even if the Rancor is a part of power you had split off, it is a given fact that your Zanpakuto had been destroyed in a state of Benkai. Yamamoto, who was silent all this while, spoke to Mizuru. Zanpakuto? Mizuru raised the broken sword in his hand, and a strange smile formed on the corner of his mouth. In your opinion, what is Zanpakuto? Isn't it just the manifestation of Shinigami's soul? So if the sword is destroyed, Shinigami can't exert the ability of Zanpakuto, right? Mizuru's tone changed again. Sadly, that's only aimed at you people. For me, Zanpakuto is nothing more than a vessel for the realization of my power into reality. Before he awakened Zanpakuto all the way back then during his life in Hueco Mundo, he already had the ability to devour spiritual energy. Then his Zanpakuto was awakened after he learned Sword Zen and got his hands on an Asaki, and several of his abilities became stronger. But as another part of the soul merged into the body, the boundary was broken in an instant, and after the power reached an unprecedented level, Mizuru also understood part of the truth. The so-called Zanpakuto was nothing more than the power that already exists in his body, following the laws of this world, looking for a carrier, and name, and manifesting it. His soul was not a soul of this world, and his power does not originate from the rules of this world. While speaking, Mizuru casually threw away the broken sword in his hand. Then, he pulled out another sword from his waist. This is Beelzebub's resurrection blade. Sword. Liberation. Mizuru released his sword. The crimson enchantment reappeared, covering the world. He looked at Yamamoto, whose complexion changed drastically, and had an extremely ugly expression, and said, "Look, don't my abilities still exist?" Chapter 334, Fall of the Sun. It happened in an instant. A snap in the air where the world twisted, then settled into a cruel clarity. The battlefield, once hazy with swirling spiritual pressure, suddenly stood stark and sharp. Blood soaked the earth, and the acrid scent of burning spirit energy clawed at every nostril. All eyes turned to Mizuru. His Zanpakuto had been shattered. Obliterated mid-Benkai in a brutal clash no one believed he could survive. Yet here he was, standing tall, breathing steadily, and more terrifying than ever. He tore open the barrier once more. Not with the familiar blade of his Zanpakuto, but with something darker, something foreign to the Soul Society. Unrankar's resurrection? Shock rippled through the ranks of the 13th Division of Imperial Guards. Such a fusion was unprecedented. Mizuru was an enigma. His soul intertwined with Beelzebub. A hollow of immense power, once an Ace-Pata feared for his merciless command over blood and devouring. If Beelzebub was truly a fragment of Mizuru's spirit, then the blade Mizuru now wielded wasn't merely an Rancor weapon. It was his own sword, reborn in hollow form. The Central 46 had only recently begun to acknowledge the terrifying possibility that Zanpakuto and Rancor powers might intertwine. And here, that theory exploded into brutal reality. The resurrection, once dismissed as an aberration, had become a new frontier in the War of Souls. And now, Mizuru stood at the epicenter of that war. The air thrummed with tension. Captain Commander Yamamoto Genryu's Ishigakuni stepped forward, his eyes aflame beneath his brows. "Since this old man shattered your Zanpakuto," he said, voice low but carrying the weight of centuries, "I will also destroy your resurrection." His presence radiated overwhelming spiritual pressure, a searing inferno that warped the very air. With a flash of movement. Flash steps. Yamamoto closed the distance in an instant. His sword erupted in flame. Zanken no Tiki, Kita, Tenshai Kaijin. The north form of his Benkei, the burning blade that reduced heaven and earth to ash. The fiery arc he swung carved through the battlefield, consuming everything, rock, soil, spiritual particles. All turned to molten ruin. A fissure opened in the barrier, cracking its shimmering barrier. For a heartbeat, hope surged. But then the breach sealed itself, as if time reversed its damage. Mizuru's voice whispered behind Yamamoto's back. "Did you think the power I regained would be so weak?" In a blink, Mizuru reappeared beside Yamamoto, his resurrection blade gleaming with lethal intent. Yamamoto responded instantly, his attack poised to strike. But the flames licking his body. The Zanjitsu Gakui, said to incinerate even the smallest fragments of spirit, did not harm Mizuru. His flesh did not blister. His blade did not melt. Yamamoto's eyes widened in disbelief. Even the sun, mighty and eternal, must one day wither. Baraganlusenbairn, the former Segunda, second, Ace-Pata, had wielded the power of aging and decay. Yet despite his overwhelming authority, Baragan's power was slow, weighed down by his own decrepit form. Mizuru's bond with Beelzebub had transformed the power, sharpening it into something far more lethal. His blade pulsed with the corrosive aura of time itself. Yamamoto's flames blackened, corroded by the relentless decay. Time began gnawing at the fabric of flame and flesh alike. Yamamoto launched forward, moving with blistering speed. Flash steps honed over centuries. Mizuru was faster. He didn't just dash through space. He folded it. Hiroshin Zanchiki. Flying Thunder God Slash, the infamous Flying Thunder God Slash from another universe. Mizuru's blade flickered, warping space as it materialized inches from Yamamoto's throat. A severed arm flew across the battlefield, trailing smoke and embers. Yamamoto staggered back, breathing ragged, his Benkai dissipating. His Zanpakuto snapped shut, sealing away its immense power. Yamaja. Shunsei's voice broke through the roar of battle, disbelief ringing clear. Mizuru, fully merged with Beelzebub, radiated an aura of deathly stillness. The barrier pulsed with unstable power, its fiery heart reduced to ash beneath the relentless decay. And with one ruthless strike, Mizuru had severed the arm of the strongest captain. Suddenly, the battlefield exploded with light and sound. A blast of spiritual energy. A black and crimson beam. Ripped through the air. Sero. Stark had fired. Shunsei barely dodged the deadly attack, earth erupting where he had stood moments before. Stark's cold voice cut through the chaos. You worry about others. At a time like this? Shunsei's expression hardened. His resolve did not falter. All across the field, Shinigami surged forward. Captains, lieutenants, officers. Ready to protect their commander. But the Espada formed a wall, ready to meet them. Mizuru advanced, dragging the resurrection, which thrummed with the slow, inevitable power of decay. Looks like I win. Blood poured from Yamamoto's severed shoulder, but the captain commander rose. Unyielding. With a roar that shook the battlefield, he lunged. Hado number 96, Flaming Sword of Cremation. The one-sword cremation. A massive, flaming blade descended from the heavens, blazing with divine fury. It slashed toward Mizuru, consuming the air with heat. Mizuru's left hand rose lazily. Snap. The burning sword evaporated. Annihilated by an unseen force. Kido attacks condensed with spiritual pressure? Useless against me. Mizuru's voice was calm, deadly. Before Yamamoto could retreat, Mizuru drove his blade deep into the old man's chest. The blade pierced through, emerging from his back. Blackened and bloodied. You lose, old man. The battle had shifted. Mizuru, the fusion of Shinigami and Hollow, wielded powers that bent the laws of both worlds. His resurrection was no mere transformation. It showed the ultimate evolution of spirit and decay. Yamamoto, the eternal flame of the Soul Society, had been dimmed. But the war was far from over.